This week, the eagerly anticipated John Lewis Christmas advert was launched. Built on the theme Give a Little Love, it explores how one small act of kindness can spark a chain reaction. It's a heartwarming story, and with linked sponsorship for Fair Share and Home Start, it seems to have touched the mood of the nation at this difficult time. There's nothing to dislike about the sentiments, and it may seem churlish to criticise it. But the truth is that as Christians, when it comes to giving, we're called to a far more radical way of life. Our gospel message gives us an indication of just how radical, and it doesn't make for comfortable reading. Mark describes how a young man of some social standing came and knelt before Jesus and asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" At first, Jesus' response seems quite offhand. He reminded the man of some of the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony, do not defraud, honour your father and mother. This must have seemed quite puzzling for the young man. How to be sure of a place when God brought in his kingdom was a topic hotly debated by the religious leaders of the day. As a teacher with a growing reputation, Jesus would have been expected to have a particular take on the subject. Yet he wasn't adding anything new. He simply seemed to be restating the basics, and the man already had those things covered. He had lived a good life and could tick all those boxes. But if the man was feeling complacent, it was short-lived, because there was more to follow, and it was far more radical than anything he could have imagined. Jesus didn't question the man's claims in any way. Instead, we're told, he looked at him and loved him. Then he delivered his challenge. One thing you lack. Go, sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. In Jesus' eyes, being good and respectable wasn't good enough. To be sure of a place in God's kingdom required a total response, leaving behind anything else that might distract or come in the way. This man might well have kept some of the commandments, but he'd not yet learned to put God first, or to avoid covetousness or idolatry. Jesus offered him a radical solution, but it was too much for him, and we're told that he went away sad, for he had great wealth. It's hard not to feel sorry for him. He was clearly a respectable person and apparently earnestly seeking God's kingdom, so it feels as though he got a bit of a rough deal. Interestingly, Jesus didn't always ask rich people to give away all their money. When Zacchaeus said he would give half his money to the poor, Jesus seemed quite happy with that. So we can only speculate as to why this particular man was required to sell everything. Perhaps he was particularly avaricious, and could only be set free by a complete renunciation of his wealth. Perhaps up to now he had shown little concern for the poor. What we do know is that Jesus acted entirely for his good. We are told that he looked at him and loved him. And it was because he loved him that he told him the truth, that for all his moral virtue, he was going in the wrong direction. For all his material wealth, he was spiritually poor. And he offered him the opportunity to change course. Had the man accepted, he would not have been left destitute. He would have become part of a community that looked after each other's needs. As the man walked away, Jesus reflected, with real sadness we imagine, how very difficult it was for the rich to enter the kingdom of heaven. For the disciples, this would have been earth-shattering. They lived in a culture which viewed wealth as a sign of God's blessing and favour. If the rich couldn't make it into the kingdom, what chance for the rest of them? But in Jesus' eyes, material prosperity was not a sign of moral superiority or of God's favour. On the contrary, As the image of the camel going through the eye of a needle so colourfully conveys, Jesus saw wealth as an obstacle that can prevent people entering God's kingdom and from living the fruitful life that he intends for us. In the parable of the sower, he compared the lure of wealth and the desire for other things to thorns which choke the growth of the seed. And on another occasion, he stated categorically, "You cannot serve both God and money." It's a shocking message, as countercultural today as it was in Jesus' own day. So how do we respond? Selling up our homes and giving all the proceeds away probably isn't realistic, and nor is it expected. Many of Jesus' followers did own property, but we still need to hear the challenge of this passage. What should our attitude be to wealth and possessions if we are to live as followers of Jesus? In our culture, we are bombarded by messages that our value and our happiness depend on what we buy. This, of course, is a lie, but it's one we buy into because acquiring things makes us feel good about ourselves. Rather than being content with what we have, we are often quick to look towards the next thing, whether it's a car or clothes, houses or holidays, technology or experiences. There's always something new and better beckoning us forward. And let's not kid ourselves. The primary purpose of that John Lewis advert is to get us into their shops. As Christians, we need to ask ourselves whether our lifestyles are really any different to those of our prevailing culture. Are we distinctive disciples, or do we, like the rich young man, find our identity in our possessions and lifestyle? And as the writer Alison Morgan describes it, try and fit God around the edges of our identity. If our identity is first and foremost as a beloved child of God and a follower of Jesus, then we will reflect carefully about our use of money, and we will make generous giving our first priority rather than just giving what's left when we've met our own wants as well as our needs. But what is generous giving? The figure £14 a week has been mentioned a few times recently, but that really is just an average of what we need to balance our books at All Hallows this year. The Bible's guideline for giving is a tithe, 10% of our income, given first at the beginning of the month before we make other financial commitments. Now that may sound like a huge amount, but there are a number of people in this church, and not necessarily the most wealthy, who do give at that level. For some people, 10% will be an impossible sum, particularly any who have lost their livelihoods during the pandemic. But many of us could give more. We're just making other things our priority. And we don't have to stop at 10% if we're able to give more than that. All Hallows is one of the wealthiest parishes in this diocese. But when it comes to regular giving, I'm very sorry to say that we have the reputation in the diocese of being one of the least generous churches. Unlike parishes where people are on extremely low incomes, as many are in the Diocese of Liverpool, we should not be having to rely on fundraising events to cover our costs. Giving time is great, but it's not a substitute or an alternative to giving our money. A few years ago, All Hallows employed a paid youth worker. This year, we've had to get rid of our paid administrator, further reducing our capacity. Perhaps if we start to imagine again the difference we could make in our community and develop a vision, more of us will be inspired to give more. I understand that this isn't a comfortable topic. These are big challenges, and I am in no way claiming to have got it right myself. The ongoing call to radical generosity is far more challenging than giving a little love because it's Christmas. But I would urge you to look at your giving as a percentage of your income and set yourself a target to increase it. The Diocese of Oxford, actually, are encouraging people to work towards a target of 6%, which is interesting. You know, I can't imagine that many people come to the end of their lives and regret not having had more or better stuff. Far more likely regrets are a lack of generosity to others, failing to invest in things that were of lasting worth, and not having had the courage to live the fruitful life that we were called to. The disciples left everything to follow Jesus and share the good news of the kingdom. The rich young man, as far as we know, went back home to the comfort and apparent security of his possessions. I wonder what people will say about us.